Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our 10-minute Bible lesson. You know, probably if you've been tuning in, we've been doing lessons from the book of Psalms. We've done several, but since the book of Psalms is such a large book, we're not going to be just continuing because it'd take a long time to go through the whole book of Psalms. So we're going to jump to the next book today, and the next book will be the book of Proverbs. So when I think of the book of Proverbs, this is kind of what comes to mind. I think of it as a book that has a large collection of excellent advice. Now, whether we take that advice or not, that's kind of up to us. But now some people call the book of Proverbs the book of wisdom. And so we're going to be looking at chapter 1 in Proverbs in the first few verses. Now, we're not going to cover verse 1 because verse 1, all it says, it just talks about who wrote the book of Proverbs. It tells us that Solomon did, the son of King David. But we're going to start off by reading Proverbs 1, verses 2 and 3. Let's go ahead and read that. I hope you have your Bible. You can kind of follow along with me in our Bible lesson. So Solomon says this, he said, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. Oh, so where do we begin with this? It just seems like that what come to my mind is that this book starts off and tells us what it hopes to do. Now, what in the world is this book hope to do? I mean, it has an object, and what's it supposed to do? Here's what it wants to do. It wants us to know what wisdom is. And obviously, it wants us to know not only what wisdom is, but how we can apply it to our life. Well, what else does it hope to do? It wants us to know how we're to receive instructions. And I don't know about you. I don't know if it's just a man thing or not, but sometimes men, we have a hard time with instructions. We go, I don't need those instructions. But really we do. And one of the reasons for the purpose of the book of Proverbs is to encourage us that we'll receive instructions. That is, that we'll understand how important that is to be able to receive instructions. Now, wisdom is not the same as knowledge. I think some people think wisdom and knowledge, they kind of use that interchangeably, but there's a difference there. You see, wisdom is the application of knowledge. So that's a little bit different. It's the application of knowledge in the right way and in the right time, if that makes sense. And to perceive words of understanding, what does that mean exactly? That means that we would learn to discern the things that have real lasting value. And so I think that if we could gain understanding, then if you could picture that as us gaining understanding, then we would have an understanding of things that had lasting value. Now, we live in a world where it seems like just material things are really important, but the fact of the matter is that things that have really, really lots of value, they're not material. They're not about things at all. They're about like what Solomon says here. He says like justice, or like using good judgment, or equity, which is actually fairness. Now, let's go ahead and look at the next verse. That would be Proverbs 1:4, and just see what it says. So he says, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. And I was trying to think about, well, what exactly does prudence mean? It's not a word that I use a whole lot, and maybe it's because I'm not real prudent. The reason that what they're trying to do here is trying to help to give prudence to the simple. Now, let me just see if I can define prudence, at least in my own way. Prudence is knowing what to do and how to behave in an appropriate way. And, I can tell you, I failed in that many times. Notice something else about this verse that I think is interesting. It says that the hope is to instill prudence in the simple. Now, a lot of times when we think of people that are simple, we just think, pardon me for saying this, but we just kind of think people are not very smart if they're simple. And that's not exactly what Solomon's talking about when he's referring to a simple person. Actually, he's referring to someone that may be naive or someone that just doesn't know what to do. And here's something else about this verse that I think that's really interesting and worth noting is that it mentions the young man or the young person. So what are the Proverbs hoping to do? They're hoping to give the young person knowledge and discretion. Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Man, oh man, if I, in my young age, if I would have just had somebody to give me some wisdom and give me a little bit of instructions and if I'd have been willing to do that, I could just think as a young person, wouldn't it help to kind of set the path that would be to follow? So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to give information and knowledge to a young person. Now let's go ahead and look at verse 5 and see what verse 5 says. So Proverbs 1:5 says, and it tells us what a wise person will do. What will a wise person do? Well, let's read about it. It says, a wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. Wow, that's what a wise person will do. So everyone, this is my opinion. I think everybody has the potential to be wise. Now, we're not all created equally in the sense that we all have the same amount of intelligence. Hey, listen, some people are smarter than other people. But I want you to understand that wisdom doesn't have to do with intelligence quotient. That's really not in the factor of being a wise person. In fact, people that have a high IQ, sometimes they're not wise. I think we see that every day. We see people that quote unquote are really smart people, but the things they do are just not wise. So everybody has the potential to be wise. Now, being wise is learning the best way to navigate this life. That's what being wise is. Hey, who doesn't want to navigate this life in the best way we can? And that's what wisdom is, and helping others along the way. Wouldn't that be a great thing to do? So there's the desire to learn, especially from our mistakes. And learning would be part of the way of learning is keeping these things here open, and maybe this thing here closed a little more. So some of those things could just help us maybe to be a little more wise. Let's look at verse 7, Proverbs 1:7, and see what it says. So it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instructions. So if I want to learn from my mistakes and I want to be more open to instructions, where do I begin? And where do I start on that road to being a wise person? Where does that happen? Where's actually the starting point? Well, you might say this, and you wouldn't be necessarily, that wouldn't be a bad thing if you said this. Hey, start by reading books. If you read, and you can increase your knowledge certainly by reading, and that would help. It's not bad advice. It's just not the advice that Solomon said. What in the world did Solomon say was the actual beginning on the road to wisdom? Well, he tells us right here. He says this. He says the beginning of wisdom is to fear the Lord. Isn't that an interesting statement? So to fear the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, or here it actually says knowledge. So having a great deal of respect and awe for the one who created us. It really, in some ways, all roads lead to God. And even wisdom has to do, to be a wise person, according to Solomon, that the beginning of that and the start of that is to fear the Lord. That is to say, it has to do with what we think about God. And I think that's really, really important for our life. How do we feel about God? Do we believe in Him? Do we believe that He is an awesome being, a great being, a wise being, a wonderful being, a mighty being, someone who's to be feared or respected or to have in awe? Hey, listen, that attitude that we have toward God can be the very thing that starts us on the road to wisdom. Now, one final thing I want to mention, because there's one other thing in this verse that it says. And notice the final thought in this verse is about what a fool does. Wow, what does a fool do? Well, it tells us he despises or he hates wisdom and instruction. You know, I have to admit, I think sometimes all of us have a certain amount of fool in us because all of us sometimes we just double down and get hard-headed and hard-hearted and won't change and won't listen. But we need to understand that it's the fool that's a fool that despises wisdom and instruction. So I would just kind of say like a little prayer here at the end. My prayer would be this: God help us, God teach us, God give us a desire to be wise and to be instructed in your ways. Wouldn't that be a great thing to do? So listen, I hope that you've enjoyed just these little thoughts on the first chapter of Proverbs. Now we're going to jump over next time over, I believe, into chapter 3. And there's some now this chapter kind of tells us how important wisdom is and how much wisdom wants us to obtain it. Now, when we talk about it next time, we're going to be giving some really good advice from this book. So we hope you join us. Have a great week.